Alright, we're going to do a quick walkthrough on the install of the PM88 Exhaust by PM Tuning out of the UK for the Royal Alloy 150 here in the US. Talk about what it's like to remove the factory exhaust and what it takes to get this new one installed. So let's do a brief overview of the tools that we are going to require for this job. First up, we have our exhaust assembly gasket material. That'll get applied to our joints. We've got our power ratchet. We've got our torque wrench, followed by our 13mm socket, my extensions and my 13mm wrench. I've got my Wobble extension here. Of course, after that, we go over to our spring puller tool. That's going to be really useful. Got our 13mm wrench, and then our 6mm T-handle Allen, as well as our full metric Allen key set. That's going to be pretty much all the tools we need to install this after you've got the side panels off the scooter. Do a quick overview of the components that come in our PM Tuning exhaust kit. Everything comes as it's shown here, with the exception of our hanger, which I forgot to include. But we can see here's our two-piece exhaust, comes assembled as one, and we're going to use this spring puller here not only to take it apart so we can install it, but then to reinstall that spring, which holds that joint between our mid-pipe and our exhaust nice and tight. We've got all of our hardware up here, our gaskets, bolts, nuts, our rubber bumper, and we're going to go ahead and just take a look at the exhaust one more time. Looks really good from a few feet away. Up close, the welds, they may leave a little something to be desired. Looking at the rear of the exhaust, we can see the baffle that comes pre-installed. Remove that with the little Allen screw. Be a bit louder, but let's get to the install. Once you've got the side panel off, we got to find where the exhaust studs are. And those are going to be way down here. It's hard to tell. They're up here, behind the center stand. So I'm going to have to work my way in from down below to get to those right back here, knock that exhaust off. You've also got your exhaust hung right here with this bolt, and then right here with this second bolt. So we pop those off, and that should give us the exhaust free. As we get up in here, we can tell that that beautiful Royal Alloy quality means I'm missing an exhaust nut already. Not thrilling, but it could be worse. So we're going to go ahead and get the other one off. I'm using to get this exhaust nut off is a 13mm deep socket on a regular extension, on a Wobble extension here. Just gives me a little more play. So all I have to do is take this, slot her up on this way. Hard to see with the camera. We can come up right here, and that let me just get into my exhaust bolt. Whoop. Like so. Once we're on that, we can just back her out. And we do the same thing for this side over here, if we happen to have a bolt in place. In my case, I didn't, but that Wobble extension was going to give us the play we need to get up in there. To get these guys off, it's a pretty straightforward process. Get a 13mm wrench on one side, get a 13mm socket on the other, and we're just going to go ahead and bust that loose. In my case, we're going to use power tools. Put my 13 on this side, put my little Milwaukee right here, back that bolt all the way out. As we pull the bolts, be careful to catch your nut with no washer that comes off the back side. And we're going to do the same thing up on that top bolt, except it doesn't need us to put anything on the back. It screws into the engine casing. Knock her loose. Just like that. And now our exhaust is going to come free. And we can go ahead and we can work our way off. You know what? I lied to you. Whoever's watching this. We've got another bolt holding this in right over here. Back there. So, looks like another 13 that we're not going to be able to put a power tool on. But we're also going to have to just go for a wrench on that side. So we just come over this way and just undo. This guy right here. That's going to be our last one holding the exhaust in place. Now that we've got that guy free, we're just going to take our exhaust, and we're going to work it loose from everything. And there it is. And that's going to be your factory Royal L exhaust. So what we've got here is the hanger. I forgot to show you when we looked at everything else, but we can see it's going to bolt up with 2 of the 3 bolts that we had originally. When we first mount the hanger, we don't want to do it too tightly, so I start with the top bolt into the engine casing there using my Allen key. And then we're going to take the long bolt and the spacer that were included, and we're going to install that down here on the bottom. That has an Allen on the back end, and you'll use a nut on the other side to tighten it up. We'll go ahead and start snugging up our hardware, just giving us a little bit of a firmer fit. So I've got my top bolt in. I'm going to assemble my hardware according to the instructions and use those on the lower bolt that runs from the side of the engine out. And we'll just go ahead and we'll put it on finger tight to begin with. What we want to do is have this located where it's supposed to be, but still have some of this flex in it so that we can hang everything nicely. We're going to take our separated mid or down pipe here, take the gasket that was included in the kit, fit that over the sealing flange, and get ready to put it up in the scooter. Okay, now that we've got that exhaust up in place with just the mid pipe, I'm going to take my exhaust nut, set it into my shallow 13mm socket, just the extensions and doing it by hand, feed that up there, and get a few threads to bite. I started on the left side of the motor, and then once that's on there, I can relax it a little bit, set my next nut, and repeat it on the right side of the motor. Here's just a quick peek of what I'm looking at while I run those up from the bottom so I can put the nuts on. And then there's just our down pipe hanging. We'll start to assemble. What we're going to do here is just test fit the pipe, sort of figure out how we have to clock it so that everything lines up nicely, doing it without any sort of that exhaust sealant or exhaust paste. But we're noticing right away, and we knew from the Facebook group, that this doesn't sit flush against the hanger. It must be something a little bit different between the US and the UK bikes, but we do need a spacer in. So I'm just going to go ahead and sort of move this around until it's clocked to about where I want it. We know the spring tabs won't line up, but we can see here's that big gap. And if we push it tight up and we were to just force a bolt in there and sort of pinch it over, we're going to put a lot of stress on the exhaust, and we're going to open up this little gap here, leading ourselves maybe to some exhaust leaks or things like that. So to hold it in place where that bolt would go, I just used a screwdriver. You can use an Allen or anything like that. Just making sure everything else lines up, and we can figure out what sort of space we're going to need to fill with a spacer. Measure it right here, but looking pretty good. Based on what we're looking at here, I'm going to need a longer bolt by maybe 20mm, and I'm going to need a spacer. We'll look for an aluminum bushing at Ace Hardware.
something like that at about 1 inch. And that'll give us the option to get this nice and mounted tight without stressing the pipes at all.
Now we'll go ahead and tighten down our hanger. To do the bottom piece here, put a 6mm Allen on the back end, wrench on this side, and just tighten her down.
All right, got a 60mm long M8 socket bolt. This here is a black chrome spacer, nice thick wall. It's 1 inch wide, and that's going to fit in right here in between our exhaust. Before we can put the exhaust on, take this little jobby here, and as recommended, some exhaust assembly paste or exhaust sealant. We're going to use that so it seals up the joint here and here. That'll also be held in place with our spring. Not putting on video because it's too much fiddling around, but we can see here, got that gasket material sort of pushing out the sides, and we'll leave that there while we clock in and get this guy set up. So, nut, washer, spacer. You can let it rest like this for a few moments. You're not going to hurt anything. You don't want to leave the exhaust free hanging all the time, but we can get by. Once we've got her in, now we can start bolting it all together, clean up our exhaust stuff here, and hang our spring. All right, bolts are all tightened down. Take your spring, fit it over your front hook, knock all your shit over, grab your spring hook. You can see here, hook it in, and we're going to pull back and get that set up over that guy. I have to reposition a little bit. Once that's in, we've got our exhaust spring hung. Got to fix it because I managed to fuck up my little rubber. Now that we fixed our rubber, I can come in here with a rag and I'm just going to press and wipe in that exhaust sealant, get it cleaned up so it doesn't make too much of a mess. Now that we've got everything put in, we're going to come up in here. We're going to torque those 2 head bolts on our exhaust, one there and the other hiding back there on the other side. And that should be everything we need to make our new fun exhaust run beautifully.
All right, I believe the torque spec for a GY6 motor is about 14 foot-pounds, so put our contraption together and we'll just go ahead and tighten those down. All right, we're simply going to take our torque wrench and our extensions, reach up in there, set them on the nuts just like you'd expect, and we'll tighten these down until we get that click out of our torque wrench at about that 14 foot-pounds. That's what I found for the generic GY6 motors. The Royal Alloy service manual doesn't really tell you shit.
So what I've now discovered is that our original socket cap bolt that held in our factory exhaust mount down here is long enough to fit in with our spacer, our 1 inch spacer. I went with that fancy black chrome, and that'll hold everything in there. Nice stainless hardware. So we're going to go ahead and swap that out now. Pop it out. We're just going to swap it over as we try to one-hand thread a bolt in. There we go. Right out the back end, just like somebody in China intended. And we'll bolt it all back together now using the 6mm socket, not socket, hex on the back of it, right here, with our 13mm wrench. Just go ahead and torque her to some vague sense of a spec. German spec, Putin tight.
All right, Our final steps are going to take this rubber bumper, mount it to our center stand. This just keeps the center stand from smacking into the engine casing, since the original little rubber bumper here would have interfaced with the factory exhaust. So put that on, goes right in the center screw hole here, and we just tighten it down. So we'll go ahead, once it's installed, just put our socket on it and tighten it down with that nylock nut. Taking our final look at everything on the bench, we've torqued everything down as tight as we can get it. We've got our baffle installed, our spring is where it needs to be. Our assembly instructions tell us to let it idle for 10 minutes to set that exhaust sealant. We can see our rubber bung is mounted to our center stand there. That'll interface with the engine, keep any excess noises in check. And then our exhaust studs are all tightened up. We're good to put this down and give her a run.